What's good, family? It's your boy Justbwise, and today we're talking about some camera basics. Now, I understand if you're a subscriber to this channel, then you probably don't even need this video. You probably like, yo, we got it. We know the basics. We need to talk about something else. Hold on. By the way, if you're not a subscriber, then come on, just please join us. We'd love to have you. The Bwise family is growing, and we love new people. Come on, the more the merrier. Anyway, we do need to get into this because this is a video I've been needing to make for some time now. I have a bunch of friends who want to get into photography, and they've asked me basics, and I'm tired of telling them in person, so now I can just send them a link. That's terrible to do, but I'm gonna do it. Let's go. Now, typically on this channel, what we talk about is a lot of video stuff since I love video, but lately I have been doing a lot more photography and have been falling in love with photography actually. So it's also gonna help to lay the groundwork for some of the stuff we're gonna talk about with video. So we're gonna start off talking about strictly photography in this video today. And when it comes to photography, there are three main settings that you wanna be aware of: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now, I'm gonna try to do my best to explain this in the simplest form possible. So all you camera nerds out there, look, you're gonna get mad, so you may wanna leave now. I don't like telling people to leave, but I don't want you to be mad at me for how I explain it. Since photography is all about light, these three are typically referred to as the exposure triangle. Now, they all affect how your camera's gonna deal with the light differently. So let's go over each of these one by one, starting with shutter speed. So shutter speed refers to how long the sensor is gonna be exposed to light. For example, slow shutter speed, fast shutter speed. So in layman's terms, the longer the shutter speed, the brighter the image will be, and the shorter, the darker, mostly because the longer it's exposed to light, the more light it can let in. Now, that's not the only thing it affects, because also the longer the shutter speed, the longer it has to actually gain detail, so it can have a sharper image as well. Now, with that said, keep in mind that any movement that's happening while the shutter is open will be recorded as well. So it can make for super cool shots like this, and some not cool shots like this. So if you're taking some shots and you feel like you had everything in focus and it still looks a little blurry, chances are that it could be your shutter speed is just a little bit too long. Next up, aperture. Now, if you ask me, aperture is the most famous of the three, or at least for right now it is. The simple way to explain it is aperture refers to how much of the lens is open to allow light into the sensor. The lower the f-stop, the more open the lens is. Often you'll hear lower aperture lenses referred to as fast. That's because lower aperture equals more light, which in turn means the shutter speed can be faster as the light difference can be made up for with the lower f-stop. Now, why did I say in the beginning that this was the most famous of the three? Because of bokeh. Bokeh-licious background blur. Now, lower apertures are what produce that bokeh. And in layman terms, bokeh is just essentially out of focus background, right? The lower your aperture is, the more narrow your focus area is, which can cause it to be a little bit more difficult to actually dial in your focus at times. So also, while low aperture is super trendy, it may not always be practical. So if you're shooting a group shot, it may not make the most sense to shoot at a 1.8 because anybody who's behind the person in front is gonna be out of focus. So, you know, it's not, while it is trendy, not always practical. ISO. Now to the final of the three, ISO or whatever the heck you want to call this thing. Anyway, that is pretty much just the software inside your camera producing a brighter image. So the best way I can describe it is it's pretty much like fake light. Like you're just turning up the brightness in the picture artificially. It's not actually manipulating light as much as it's just adding brightness to your picture. Now, the more you add, the more you're gonna degrade the quality of your photo, because it's anything artificial that you're adding in, it's gonna start to just add noise and grain into the image. So at all costs, if you can, the lower the ISO, typically the better. Most people like to shoot at a lower ISO because they don't want to add a bunch of noise and grain into their image. Now let's talk about how these things all work together. Now, depending on what type of photography you're into will determine on how you're setting your exposure with these different details. Whether it's portrait, long exposure, indoor, outdoor, flash, sport photography, everything is going to be set completely different. And then again, that's another part of what makes photography so much fun, is there is no right or wrong way to do it. There is like a baseline or an understanding, but really it's all subjective to the artist. So you guys have full control to manipulate your settings to dial in how you want. But not understanding how these things worked in the first place could make you kind of like all over the place. So I just want to do a real small, quick recap to kind of go over how these different things are going to affect your image. We start off with shutter speed. And shutter speed, again, the longer the shutter speed, the more light you're letting in. Also, you're allowing more time for the shutter to be open. So if there's any movement, the movement is going to be captured. So if you're taking a portrait, you may not want the super highest shutter speed because you need it to have some brightness, but you don't want a super low shutter speed where it's taking too long to take the picture and your model's moving and your hands are shaking. So you want to find a balance somewhere in there where you can capture the shot, freeze the image, and still have a good amount of brightness in your picture. Now, in a portrait, still in that same setting, you may want to have a little bit lower of an aperture if you're taking a portrait of 1 or 2 people, so you can have that nice, creamy, beautiful, bokeh-licious background blur in the image. So you can have a lower aperture, you're going to have less area of focus, but you're going to have the main subject in your image isolated because the background is going to be all blown out, right? And lastly, ISO. So if you're shooting at a super high shutter speed like sports photography, you may want to have a very, very hefty sensor in your camera so you can crank that ISO up and not have a bunch of grain in your image. If that's not what you're into, then try to keep that ISO as low as possible. For me, ISO is the last thing that I raise because I'm trying to dial everything else in first, and then if I need some extra brightness, I'll add in some ISO so I don't have a lot of grain in my image. So that's pretty much all I got for you guys today. Hopefully that was an easy way for you to understand the baseline of how your camera settings work. So you can go out and get some shots today. I would say go out and play with all the settings now. Now that you kind of understand how they work, go out and kind of test these things out to see how it's going to work for you as you build your creative library. So if you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up. And if you have any details or things to add, or even if you have any questions, please go ahead and leave them in the comment section below. And as always, I gave you some tools to create. Now go be great. Peace.